Hey guys, tonight we slip into the sands of ancient Egypt, where the air smells of dust and secrets, and a nameless queen waits in a tomb that's more puzzle than resting place. You're standing at the edge of a limestone shaft, the kind carved deep into the desert's belly where torchlight flickers like it's nervous to be here. The walls are smooth, too smooth, and there's no name, no face, no hint of who she was. Only silence heavy as the stone slab sealing her in. You might think you're ready to unravel this mystery, but spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this level of ancient shade without a nap. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just anywhere, you're in a necropolis, probably near Saqqara or the Valley of the Queens, where the sun blisters the ground by day and the stars feel like they're watching by night. The tomb you're about to enter isn't one of those tourist-friendly spots with neat hieroglyphs in a gift shop. No, this one's different. It's tucked away half forgotten, and the locals who helped dig it up in the 19th century probably whispered it was bad luck. The entrance is narrow, barely wide enough for you to squeeze through, and the air inside is cool, almost clammy like the breath of someone who's been holding it for 3,000 years. You shuffle forward, your sandals scuffing on the stone, and you notice the walls are blank. No grand titles, no beloved of Amun, no nothing. Just smooth, unyielding limestone like the tomb itself is saying, mind your business. This queen, whoever she was, got the ultimate ancient Egyptian snub, no name. In a culture obsessed with immortality through words where your name was your ticket to the afterlife, this is a big deal. The Egyptians believed that speaking a name kept a soul alive, so erasing one was like unplugging someone's eternity. Historians know this from texts like the Book of the Dead, which spells out how names were tied to existence itself. If you didn't have one good luck convincing Osiris to let you into the field of reeds. This queen's anonymity wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, like someone wanted her gone from memory. But who and why? You're starting to wonder if this is less a burial and more a cover-up. Now let's get to the quirky stuff. There's this fringe theory, stay with me, that some tombs were left nameless not out of spite, but to protect the dead from looters or spiritual sabotage. Think of it like ancient witness protection. No name, no target. Some Egyptologists, the ones who hang out in dusty archives and probably talk to their cats about papyrus, suggest this queen might have been too important to risk exposure. Maybe she was a rebel, a heretic, or just someone who ticked off the wrong high priest. Historians still argue whether this was punishment or precaution, and the debate's as lively as a Nile hippo at feeding time. You're not sure yet, but the idea of a queen so powerful she had to be hidden gives you a little shiver. As you creep deeper, the tomb's layout starts to mess with your head. Most royal tombs follow a playbook, long corridors offering chambers, maybe a cheeky false wall to trick robbers. This one is weirdly minimalist. There's a single chamber ahead, no fancy antechambers, no parade of gods painted in lapis blue. It's like the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a studio apartment, functional but not screaming royalty. You spot a few faint chisel marks like someone started carving her story and then just stopped. Did they run out of time? Budget cuts? Or was someone standing over the workers saying, "Nope, scratch that, she gets nothing"? You can't help but chuckle at the thought of an ancient project manager shrugging and packing up his tools. The silence in here is loud, isn't it? You're used to tombs with walls shouting about pharaohs wrestling crocodiles or queens being adored by gods. But this one's like a library where everyone's shushing you. You're starting to feel like you're trespassing, like the queen's spirit is side-eyeing you from the afterlife, wondering why you're poking around her minimalist eternity. The air's getting thicker now, and you catch a whiff of something, maybe old resin, maybe the ghost of myrrh. It's not unpleasant, just ancient. You're wondering what kind of queen ends up in a place like this. Was she a nobody who married up a ruler who fell from grace? Or maybe she was someone so dangerous her name had to be erased to keep the gods themselves from noticing. You pause at a rough patch in the wall where it looks like someone tried to chisel something and gave up. It's not much, just a few lines that might have been the start of a cartouche, those oval loops that hold royal names. But it's empty like a frame with no picture. You run your fingers over it, and it's smooth, almost polished, like someone took extra care to make sure nothing was left. You're starting to get why this tomb feels like a secret. It's not just about who she was, it's about who didn't want her remembered, and that's where the real mystery kicks in. You're hooked now, aren't you? Ready to keep going to see what else this tomb's hiding. Let's take a beat to imagine you're not alone. There's a tiny scarab beetle skittering across the floor, probably thinking it owns the place. You give it a nod respect to the locals and keep moving. The chamber's getting closer, and you can feel the weight of the stone above you pressing down like the expectations of an entire dynasty. You're not just walking through a tomb. You're walking through someone's attempt to rewrite history. And yeah, it's a little spooky, but in a cozy, let's solve this before bed kind of way. You're wondering what her deal was, why she got the silent treatment, and what's waiting in that chamber. Spoiler, it's not going to be a gold-encrusted selfie with Anubis, but it's definitely going to be weird. You're deeper in the tomb now, the air thick with that musty ancient scent like old papyrus and forgotten promises. The walls are still blank, mocking you with their silence, and the flickering torchlight makes shadows dance like they're in on the secret. You're here to unravel why this queen's burial rites were designed to keep her name hushed, her identity locked away tighter than a pharaoh's treasure. It's not just the lack of a name that's got you curious, it's the eerie rituals that sealed her into this eternal mute button. You're trudging through a narrow corridor, your footsteps echoing like a heartbeat, and you can't shake the feeling that this place was meant to stay quiet. Forever. Let's set the scene. You're in a necropolis, maybe near Thebes, where the cliffs loom like judgmental gods. The tomb's entrance is behind you, a faint sliver of starlight fading as you descend. The Egyptians were big on ritual ceremonies so precise they make modern wedding planners look like amateurs. For a queen, you'd expect a send-off with all the bells and whistles, priests chanting, incense-curling mourners, throwing themselves dramatically into the dust. But this queen, her burial feels like it was done on the down low, like someone whispered, "Let's wrap this up before anyone notices." The mainstream fact here is that royal burials followed a strict script laid out in text like the pyramid texts. These were spells carved into Old Kingdom tombs to guide the dead through the afterlife, ensuring they'd schmooze with Osiris and not get stuck in eternal customs. But here's where it gets weird. This queen's rites seem to have skipped the VIP treatment. Instead of the usual fanfare, her burial might have involved something called the silencing ritual, a fringe tidbit that pops up in some obscure papyri. Picture this priest cloaked in linen so white it glows in the dark, muttering spells, not to praise her, but to bind her soul to silence. They might have used resin-soaked bandages not just to preserve her body, but to symbolically seal her voice. Why? Maybe to keep her from spilling divine tea in the afterlife. You're imagining a priest probably sweating through his linen, nervously checking over his shoulder as he pours resin, like it's the last step in a cosmic cover-up. Historians still argue whether this was a punishment or a protective measure. Did she anger the gods? Or was her silence a shield against something darker? You're at a turn in the corridor now, and the walls feel closer, like they're trying to hug you a bit too tight. You notice faint scratches, not hieroglyphs, just marks like someone was testing their chisel and got bored. Or scared. The air's cooler here, and you catch a whiff of something sharp, myrrh maybe, or the ghost of ancient wax. You're thinking about those priests again. They didn't just bury her. They performed a ritual so specific it feels like they were following orders from someone with a grudge. You're picturing a high priest all serious with his shaved head and coal-lined eyes whispering incantations that sound like a lullaby but hit like a gag order. It's kind of funny in a dark way, like the ancient equivalent of putting someone's phone on, "Do not disturb forever." Let's lean into that for a second. Imagine you're one of those priests tasked with burying a queen no one's allowed to name. You're probably stressed, wondering if you'll get demoted to cleaning the temple latrines if you mess this up. You're carrying a clay pot of resin, the kind that smells like a forest fire and sticks to everything. Your job is to make sure her soul stays quiet, which is a tall order when you're dealing with the queen who might have been a big deal in life. You're chanting softly something about binding the ka to shadow, and you're hoping the gods aren't watching too closely. It's a high-stakes gig, and you're not even sure why she's getting this treatment. Did she steal someone's divine parking spot? You chuckle to yourself, but the echo in the tomb makes it sound like the walls are laughing too. Back to you, the explorer. You're starting to get why this tomb feels so off. The silencing ritual wasn't just about skipping the usual pomp. It was about control. The Egyptians believed the afterlife was a bureaucracy with gods like Anubis checking your paperwork. A queen without a name is like showing up to the DMV with no ID. You're wondering what she did to deserve this. Was she a rebel like Hatshepsut who dared to wear the pharaoh's beard? Or maybe she was caught in a political scandal, the kind that makes palace gossip sound like a soap opera. You're itching to know, but the tomb's not talking. Yet. You pause to catch your breath, leaning against a wall that's colder than you expected. There's a faint carving here, almost invisible unless you tilt your head just right. It's not a name, but a symbol, a lotus half-finished, like someone started it and then thought better of it. Lotuses were big in Egyptian burials, tied to rebirth and all that poetic stuff. But this one's incomplete, like the ritual itself was cut short. You're starting to picture the scene: a small group of priests, maybe 3 or 4, working in the dead of night. No crowds, no wailing mourners, just the crackle of torches and the drip of resin. They're moving fast, like they're afraid someone's going to catch them. You're wondering if they believed in what they were doing, or if they were just following orders. Let's throw in another quirky bit. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who wear socks with sandals, think the silencing ritual might have involved music. Not the happy harp kind, but low droning chants meant to lock the soul in place. Imagine a priest with a sistrum, that rattly instrument that sounds like a cosmic tambourine, shaking it in a rhythm so slow it makes you sleepy just thinking about it. The idea was to hypnotize the soul, keep it from wandering, or worse, talking. You're grinning now, picturing a priest trying to keep a straight face while shaking a glorified marasa at a royal corpse. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity feels right. You're almost at the main chamber now, and the corridor's getting tighter, like it's daring you to keep going. You're thinking about the workers who built this place. They weren't just slapping stones together, they were part of the secret. Did they know who she was? Did they whisper about her when they went home to their mud brick houses? You're imagining a worker, calloused hands and all, muttering to his buddy, "This one's trouble, I can feel it." You laugh softly because it's exactly the kind of thing you'd say if you were stuck carving a tomb for someone nobody's allowed to name. The ritual's purpose is starting to sink in. It wasn't just about burying a body, it was about burying a story. You're wondering who had the power to order this kind of erasure. A rival queen, a jealous pharaoh, or maybe the gods themselves if you buy into the idea that divine wrath was a thing. You're not sure yet, but you're hooked and the chamber's just ahead. You can feel it. The answers are close, or at least the next piece of the puzzle. You're ready to keep going to see what this silent queen's tomb is hiding next. You're standing at the threshold of the main chamber now, your torch casting long shadows that twist across the bare limestone walls like they're trying to tell you something. The air's heavier here, thick with the scent of ancient dust and something faintly sweet, maybe old wax or faded myrrh. You're here to puzzle out the faceless coffin mystery, why this queen's sarcophagus is stripped of all facial features, a blank slate in a culture that loved to carve their dead into eternal selfies. It's not just odd, it's unsettling, like someone wanted her to vanish, not just from history, but from the gods' line of sight. You shuffle forward your sandals, scraping softly, and you can't help but feel like you're intruding on a secret that's been locked away for millennia. Let's paint the picture. The chamber's small, not the grand echoing halls you'd expect for a queen. It's more like a closet with ambition, just big enough for a stone sarcophagus and a few scattered offerings. The coffin itself is the star of this creepy show, massive, carved from granite, so dark it swallows the torchlight. But here's the kicker, where there should be a serene, idealized face, there's nothing. No eyes, no nose, no gentle smile to charm Osiris. Just a smooth, featureless oval like someone took an eraser to her identity. In ancient Egypt, a coffin's face was a big deal. Mainstream texts like the coffin texts say it was meant to help the soul recognize its body in the afterlife. Without one, this queen's ka might be wandering blind, like trying to find your car in a parking lot with no landmarks. You're circling the sarcophagus now, your fingers brushing the cool stone, and you notice how precise the erasure is. It's not vandalism. Nobody hacked at it with the chisel in a fit of rage. The surface is polished almost lovingly, so like the artisans took their time to make sure every trace of her face was gone. You're wondering who gave that order. A priest, a rival, or maybe her own family trying to protect her from something worse than death. You chuckle to yourself, imagining an ancient stonecutter muttering, "Well, boss says no face, so I guess we're going for abstract art today." The thought's funny, but the silence in this chamber makes your laugh feel out of place, like you're giggling in a library during a funeral. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on. Some fringe Egyptologists, probably the ones who collect scarab-shaped paperweights, suggest the faceless coffin might have been a ritual choice, not a punishment. They point to rare texts from the New Kingdom that hint at veiled burials for certain royals, where hiding the face was a way to shield the soul from malevolent spirits. Picture it, a priest all serious with his leopard skin cloak, explaining that the queen's face had to be erased so demons wouldn't recognize her in the duat. It's a stretch, but you're kind of into it, like ancient Egypt's version of putting a paper bag over someone's head to sneak them past the paparazzi. Historians still argue whether this was a protective act or a deliberate snub, and the debate's as heated as a summer day in Memphis. You're kneeling now, peering at the coffin's edges, looking for clues. There's a faint outline where a face might have been like a ghost of a carving that never happened. You're thinking about the artisans who did this. They weren't just following orders, they were part of something bigger. Something that made them keep quiet. You're imagining a worker, maybe a young guy with dreams of being a master carver, standing here in the torchlight, his tools heavy in his hands. He's probably wondering why this queen of all people gets no face. Did he sneak a glance at her mummy before they sealed the coffin? Did he see something that made him wish he'd called in sick that day? You're grinning at the thought of him whispering to his buddy mate, "This job's giving me the creeps. Let's finish and grab some barley beer." The coffin's not alone in here. There are a few offerings scattered around clay jars, a broken alabaster dish, nothing fancy. It's like someone packed her afterlife bag with the bare minimum, like she's traveling economy class to eternity. You notice one jar has a faint lotus design which feels like a callback to that half-finished carving you saw earlier. Lotuses were all about rebirth, but this one's more like a sad sticker on a cheap suitcase. You're starting to wonder if the faceless coffin was part of the same silencing ritual you thought about in the corridor. Maybe it's not just about hiding her name, but making sure even the gods can't find her face in the crowd. It's a wild thought, and you're half laughing at how paranoid it sounds, like the Egyptians invented witness protection for the afterlife. You're back to the coffin now, running your hand along its side. There's a tiny crack barely visible where the lid doesn't quite meet the base. You're tempted to peek inside, but let's be real, you're not that brave. And the last thing you need is a 3,000-year-old side-eye from a mummy. Instead, you focus on the stone itself. Granite's tough to carve even for the Egyptians, who could build pyramids like it was a weekend project. Whoever ordered this coffin wanted it to last face or no face. You're thinking about the effort it took months, maybe years of chiseling and polishing to create something so deliberately blank. It's almost poetic, like a monument to forgetting. Let's take a step back. The faceless coffin isn't just a mystery, it's a statement. Someone somewhere decided this queen didn't get to keep her identity. You're picturing the scene: a torchlit chamber, a handful of priests, maybe a vizier looking shifty in the corner. They're wrapping up the burial, and one of them says, "No face, no name, no problem." You laugh softly because it sounds like something you'd hear in a shady, ancient Egyptian boardroom. But the laughter fades as you realize how serious this was. A queen without a face is a queen without a story, and in Egypt that's worse than death. You're starting to feel the weight of this place, the way the silence presses against your ears. The chamber's small, but it feels vast, like it's holding more secrets than it's letting on. You're wondering what's next. Maybe the coffin's not the only thing that's been erased. Maybe there's something else in this tomb. Something that explains why this queen was buried like a ghost. You're hooked, aren't you? Ready to keep going to see what other weirdness this tomb's hiding? The air's getting colder, and you're pretty sure that scarab beetle from earlier is still following you. Probably wondering why you're so nosy. You're still in the main chamber, the faceless coffin looming behind you like a silent judge, its blank granite surface reflecting your torchlight in a way that feels almost accusatory. The air's thick now, carrying that faint resinous tang that clings to your lungs, and you're hyper-aware of every sound you're breathing. The soft crunch of dust under your sandals, even the distant drip of something you hope is just water. You're here to dig into the enigma of why this queen's mouth was sealed with resin. A ritual so specific it feels like someone was trying to lock her voice in a cosmic vault. It's not just creepy, it's personal, like the ancient Egyptians wanted to make sure she'd never whisper a single word in the afterlife. Picture yourself crouching beside the sarcophagus, close enough to feel the cool stone against your fingertips. You're imagining the moment they sealed her, the final act of a burial that's already weirdly sparse. In ancient Egypt, mummification was an art form. Mainstream records, like those from the embalmers' workshops in Memphis, describe a 70-day process of preserving the body with natron, wrapping it in linen, and tucking in amulets for good luck. The mouth was a big deal. It was opened in the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual to let the soul eat, speak, and basically function in the afterlife. But this queen, her mouth was sealed shut with resin, a sticky amber-like goop that hardened into a permanent gag. You're picturing a priest, probably with a serious case of RBF, carefully pouring resin over her lips like he's sealing an envelope nobody's ever meant to open. Here's the quirky bit, and it's a weird one. Some fringe scholars, the kind who probably dream in hieroglyphs, suggest the resin wasn't just practical. It was symbolic, tied to myths about silencing dangerous souls. There's a story from the late period about a spirit who spoke too much in the duat, annoying the gods until they slapped a divine NDA on her. You're chuckling now, imagining this queen as the afterlife's resident chatterbox, her lips sealed to keep her from spilling tea to Anubis. But the laughter fades as you realize how deliberate this was. The resin wasn't slapped on carelessly, it was precise, layered over her mouth, in a way that suggests intent. You're wondering if she was a threat, someone whose words even in death could stir up trouble. You're still crouched by the coffin and you notice something odd, a faint stain on the stone near the head, darker than the rest, like spilled resin that wasn't cleaned up. It's not much, but it's enough to make you think about the embalmers who did this. They weren't just technicians. They were priests trained in rituals that blurred the line between science and magic. You're picturing one of them, maybe a guy with a nervous tic standing here in the torchlight, his hands sticky with resin. He's probably wondering why this queen of all people gets the silent treatment. Did she curse out a high priest spill state secrets? Or maybe she knew something so dangerous it had to be locked away with her. You're grinning at the thought of him, muttering, "Well, this is above my pay grade," as he seals her lips for eternity. Let's lean into that scene. You're the embalmer, now standing in a dimly lit workshop that smells like natron and regret. Your hands are slick with resin, and the queen's body is in front of you, wrapped in linen so fine, it feels like a crime to touch it. The air's heavy with incense, but it's not calming your nerves. You've done dozens of mummies, but this one's different. Orders came from someone high up, maybe the vizier himself, to seal her mouth. No explanation, just a look that says, "Don't ask questions." You're careful pouring the resin in thin layers, watching it harden like amber. It's weirdly soothing, like pouring candle wax, but you can't shake the feeling that you're doing something wrong. You're half expecting her to sit up and yell, "Excuse me, I'm still using that mouth." You laugh to yourself, but the echo in the chamber makes it sound hollow. Back to you, the explorer. You're standing now, your torch held high, and you're starting to piece things together. The faceless coffin, the nameless tomb, and now this sealed mouth, it's all part of the same puzzle. Someone wanted this queen erased not just from history, but from the afterlife itself. You're thinking about the Book of the Dead, which talks about the soul needing to speak its name to pass the gods test. Without a mouth, she's stuck like a contestant on a game show with no buzzer. Historians still argue whether this was a punishment or a precaution. Did she anger the gods, or was her silence meant to protect something bigger? The debate's as tangled as a papyrus scroll left out in the rain. You're moving around the chamber now, your eyes scanning for more clues. The walls are still blank, but you spot a small niche near the coffin, barely big enough for a single offering. Inside, there's a tiny clay vial, cracked but intact, with traces of resin inside. It's not much, but it feels like a callback to that lotus carving you saw earlier, another hint that this burial was rushed or maybe secretive. You're imagining the priests who placed it here, their faces tight with focus, their voices low as they muttered spells to keep her soul quiet. You're wondering if they believed in what they were doing, or if they were just following orders like workers clocking in for a shift they didn't understand. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the Greco-Roman period mention a ritual where resin was mixed with rare herbs like myrrh and something called Tears of Horus to create a seal that was both physical and magical. The idea was to trap the soul's voice, keeping it from calling out to the gods or anyone else. You're picturing a priest, maybe a bit of a hipster with a fancy amulet grinding herbs like he's making a smoothie for the afterlife? It's absurd, but it fits the vibe of this tomb. Everything's a little off, like a recipe where someone forgot the main ingredient. You're chuckling again, imagining the priest sneezing into the resin mix and hoping the gods don't notice. You're back by the coffin now, and the resin stain catches your eye again. It's not just a spill, it's a pattern, almost like a sigil, though it's too faint to be sure. You're starting to feel the weight of this place, the way it presses against your chest, like a warning. The sealed lips aren't just a detail, they're the heart of the mystery. Why go to all this trouble? Who was she that her voice had to be locked away? You're hooked, and the chamber's starting to feel smaller, like it's daring you to keep digging. You're ready to move on to see what else this tomb's hiding. But you can't shake the image of that resin hardening over her lips, like a secret nobody wanted told. You're still in the main chamber, the faceless coffin, and its resin-sealed secrets looming in the dim torchlight, casting shadows that flicker like they're whispering something you can't quite catch. The air's cool, almost too cool, with that faint myrrh scent, lingering like a memory you didn't ask for. You're here to sift through the faint traces of this queen's era, piecing together clues about which dynasty she belonged to, and why her identity was scrubbed so thoroughly it's like she never existed. The tomb's silence is deafening, and every step you take feels like you're tiptoeing through someone's forgotten story, trying not to trip over the truth. Let's set the scene. You're pacing the chamber now, your sandals kicking up tiny puffs of dust that swirl in the torchlight like miniature sandstorms. The sarcophagus is behind you, its blank surface still nagging at your brain, but you're looking for context now, something to pin this queen to a time, a place, a dynasty. Ancient Egypt's timeline is a beast old kingdom with its pyramid obsession, Middle Kingdom with its moody pharaohs, New Kingdom with its flashy conquests in the Greco-Roman era, with its weird Greek-Egyptian mashup. Mainstream records like the king list from Abydos tell us queens were often named, alongside their husbands or sons, their titles carved in stone to cement their legacy. But this queen, she's a ghost, her era as blurry as a papyrus left out in a Nile flood. You're scanning the chamber for clues and your eyes land on a faint mark near the floor, a cartouche outline empty like someone started to carve her name and then chickened out. It's not much, but it's a hint. The style of the tomb, with its minimalist vibe and lack of flashy decor, feels Middle Kingdomish, maybe 12th dynasty around 1900 BCE. That's when pharaohs like Senusret III were flexing their power, and queens were often power players in their own right. But here's the thing, even minor queens got their names etched somewhere. This one's erasure feels deliberate, like someone hit the delete key on her entire existence. You're chuckling now, imagining an ancient scribe muttering, "Nope, not today," as he sands down her cartouche like it's a bad first draft. Here's a quirky tidbit to spice things up. Some fringe archaeologists, probably the ones who wear linen tunics to conferences, point to rare Middle Kingdom texts that mention shadow queens, women who ruled quietly behind the throne, their names hidden to avoid political fallout. Picture a queen so influential she scared the viziers her name, left off records to keep rivals from targeting her family. It's like she was the ancient equivalent of a secret CEO running the show, but staying off the letterhead. You're grinning at the thought, picturing her sipping wine in a palace while her enemies scramble to figure out who's calling the shots. But the grin fades as you realize how serious this is erasing her name wasn't just politics, it was eternal. Historians still argue whether this queen was from the Middle Kingdom or later maybe even the chaotic Third Intermediate period when Egypt was a political mess. The debate's a tangle, with some saying her tomb's simplicity points to a time of economic decline, others arguing it's a deliberate snub from a rival faction. You're leaning toward the Middle Kingdom theory, mostly because the tomb's vibe spare functional secretive fits that era's no-nonsense attitude. You're imagining a court full of scheming nobles, maybe a jealous co-regent, who decided this queen's legacy needed to take a permanent nap. You're kneeling now, peering at that empty cartouche again. It's not just a blank space, it's a statement. You're thinking about the scribes who worked here, their hands steady as they carved everything but her name. They weren't just workers. They were part of the cover-up, maybe sworn to secrecy under threat of something worse than a bad Yelp review. You're picturing one of them, a nervous guy with ink-stained fingers, glancing over his shoulder as he smooths out the stone. He's probably wondering if he'll get in trouble for knowing too much. You laugh softly, imagining him whispering to his buddy, "This queen's drama is way above my pay grade past the chisel. Let's dive deeper into the scene." You're the scribe now standing in this chamber. Faxi thought years ago, the air thick with the smell of fresh-cut stone and burning oil. Your job is to carve the usual stuff praises to a moon spells for the afterlife. But someone, maybe a priest with a face like a grumpy cat, hands you a scroll with one instruction, no name. You're confused because names are everything in Egypt. Without one, this queen's soul is basically unemployed in the afterlife, no ID to flash at the gates of the Duat. You're carving the cartouche outline anyway because orders are orders, but you're tempted to sneak in a tiny glyph, maybe a lotus or a reed, just to give her something. But you're not that brave, and the priest's watching. Back to you, the explorer. You're standing again. Your torch casting a warm glow on the walls, and you're starting to feel the weight of this mystery. The empty cartouche, the faceless coffin, the sealed lips. It's all pointing to a dynasty that wanted her gone. You're wondering if she was a queen, like Sobekneferu, the first confirmed female pharaoh who ruled at the end of the 12th dynasty. Was she too powerful, too ambitious? Or maybe she was a lesser wife caught in a palace power struggle and a race to keep things tidy. You're thinking about that lotus carving from earlier, the half-finished one that keeps popping up like a breadcrumb in this tomb story. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the Middle Kingdom mention a ritual where queens' names were left off certain records to protect the balance of Mayat, the cosmic order. It's a wild idea, like leaving someone's name off a guest list to keep the universe from crashing. You're picturing a priest maybe a bit too into his own incense, explaining that this queen's name had to stay secret to keep the gods from throwing a tantrum. It's ridiculous, but in this tomb, ridiculous feels plausible. You're chuckling again, imagining the priest waving his arms like he's conducting an orchestra of divine red tape. You're moving toward the back of the chamber now, where the shadows are thicker, and you spot something, a faint crack in the wall, barely visible. It's not a door, not exactly, but it's enough to make you wonder if there's more to this tomb than meets the eye. You're thinking about the workers who built this place, the ones who knew its secrets. Did they whisper about her when they went home, their voices low over bowls of lentil stew? You're hooked, and the tomb's starting to feel like a puzzle box, each clue leading to another question. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen story has in store. You're deeper in the tomb now, the air so still it feels like the walls are holding their breath. Your torch flickers, casting jittery shadows that make the plain limestone look alive, almost restless. That faint crack you spotted earlier is calling to you a hairline fracture in the back wall that's too deliberate to be an accident. You're here to navigate the hidden chambers of this tomb, searching for secrets that might explain why this queen was buried without a name, her identity erased like a forbidden word. The chamber you're in feels too small for a queen, too plain. But that crack, it's a whisper of something more, something concealed. You're starting to think this tomb's playing hide and seek, and you're not sure you're winning. Picture yourself edging closer to the wall, your fingers brushing the crack. It's narrow, but there's a draft cool and faintly damp like the tomb's exhaling. Hidden chambers were a thing in ancient Egypt. Mainstream archaeology, like the studies of royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, shows they were often built to confuse robbers or protect sacred spaces. Think of Tutankhamun's tomb with its secret rooms tucked behind false walls. But this queen's tomb, it's not flashy like Tut's. The hidden chamber you're sensing isn't about gold or glory. It's about keeping something out of sight, maybe forever. You're imagining a priest all serious in his linen kilt, supervising as workers sealed this chamber, their chisels quiet to avoid curious ears. You're pressing against the crack now, and it's wider than it looked, just enough for you to slip through if you suck in your gut. You're chuckling at the thought, picturing yourself wiggling through like an ancient Egyptian. Indiana Jones, minus the fedora. But the humor fades as you realize what you're doing. You're about to enter a space nobody's seen in thousands of years. The draft is stronger now, carrying a whiff of something sharp, resin maybe, or the ghost of old cedar. You're thinking about that faceless coffin, the sealed lips, the empty cartouche. This hidden chamber might be the key, the place where the real secrets are stashed like a locked diary in a teenager's room. Here's a quirky tidbit to lighten the mood. Some fringe Egyptologists, probably the ones who name their cats after pharaohs, suggest hidden chambers weren't always for treasure. Some were decoy rooms filled with fake offerings to trick tomb robbers or even confuse malevolent spirits. Picture a room stuffed with clay pots labeled royal snacks that are actually just sand. You're grinning now, imagining a thief breaking in expecting gold and finding a pile of dusty fakes. But in this tomb, the hidden chamber feels less like a prank and more like a vault for something nobody wanted found. Historians still argue whether these chambers were for protection or deception. Did they hide the queen's true burial or something else entirely? You're through the crack, now squeezing into a smaller chamber that's barely lit by your torch. The walls are rougher here, unfinished, like the workers ran out of time or orders. There's a small stone shelf, and on it, a single object, a clay tablet cracked, but intact with faint scratches that might be writing. It's not hieroglyphs, not exactly, more like shorthand, the kind a scribe might use for notes they don't want read. You're picturing a worker, maybe a young guy with a nervous laugh, etching this tablet in secret. He's probably thinking, if I get caught, I'm toast, but he does it anyway. Maybe to leave a clue for someone like you. You laugh softly, imagining him muttering, "This queen's drama is ruining my week." Let's dive into that scene. You're the worker now, Crouched in this hidden chamber, the air thick with dust and tension. Your chisels dull, your hands ache, and the priest overseeing you keeps pacing like he's expecting bad news. You're supposed to seal this chamber, but you've heard whispers, rumors about a queen who was too powerful, too dangerous to be remembered. You're scratching out a tablet, not a full story, just enough to hint at her existence. Maybe it's her title, or a date, or even a warning. You're not sure why you're doing it. Maybe it's guilt, maybe it's rebellion, but you hide the tablet before the priest notices. You're hoping someone someday finds it. Back to you, the explorer. You're holding the tablet now, its weight surprisingly heavy for something so small. You can't rate it not yet, but it feels important, like a piece of the puzzle you've been chasing. You're thinking about the tomb's design, how the main chamber was too plain, too obvious, like it was meant to distract from this hidden space. You're wondering what else is here. There's no gold, no jewels, just this tablet and a few scattered shards of pottery. It's like the tomb's saying, look, but don't look too hard. You're starting to get why this queen was erased. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure her story stayed buried. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the New Kingdom talk about shadow chambers rooms built to house a queen's Kai, her spiritual double, separate from her body. The idea was to split her soul, keeping part of it hidden so it couldn't cause trouble. You're picturing a priest maybe a bit too fond of his lotus wine, explaining this to a confused worker like it's basic math. It's absurd, but it fits this tomb's vibe. Everything's layered like a cake nobody wants to eat. You're chuckling again, imagining the priest waving a sistrum and saying, "Trust me, it's for her own good." You're back by the shelf now, your torch casting a warm glow on the tablet. You notice something else, a faint carving on the wall, almost invisible unless you tilt your head. It's that lotus again, the half-finished one that keeps showing up like a stubborn earworm. It's not just decoration, it's a clue tying this chamber to the coffin, the sealed lips, the empty cartouche. You're thinking about the workers who built this place, the ones who knew its secrets. Did they talk about her over dinner, their voices low as they chewed flatbread? You're imagining one of them, a grizzled old mason, muttering, "This queen's trouble even dead." The chamber's starting to feel smaller, the air thicker, like it's pressing you to move on. You're wondering what this tablet says, if it's a name, a warning, or just a worker's grocery list. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are piling up like sand in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen's story has hidden. But you can't shake the feeling that this chamber's just the beginning of something bigger. You're still in the hidden chamber, the clay tablet heavy in your hands, its faint scratches teasing you with secrets you can't yet read. The air's thick, laced with that sharp resin scent, and your torchlight dances across the rough walls, making them look like they're shifting just out of sight. You're here to witness the strange offerings left for this nameless queen. Gifts so odd they feel like they were chosen by someone with a grudge or a very weird sense of humor. The main chamber's faceless coffin and sealed lips are still nagging at you. But now you're focused on what's in this hidden space, clues to why her afterlife was dressed in such peculiar trinkets. Picture yourself setting the tablet down, careful not to crack it further, and turning to scan the chamber. It's cramped, barely bigger than a walk-in closet with a low ceiling that makes you duck. On the stone shelf next to where the tablet was, you spot the offerings, a chipped clay bowl, a bundle of dried reeds, and a small, cracked alabaster vial that looks like it once held something precious. In ancient Egypt, offerings were a big deal. Mainstream texts like the Book of the Dead describe lavish gifts of food, wine, and amulets to ensure the dead lived it up in the afterlife. Think bread beer, maybe a shiny scarab for good luck. But this queen's hall, it's like someone packed her a sad lunchbox and called it a day. You're crouching now, peering at the bowl. It's empty, but there's a faint stain inside. Maybe oil or honey long since dried. You're imagining the priests who placed it here, their faces tight with focus, their movements quick like they didn't want to linger. These offerings aren't just sparse, they're deliberate, like someone chose them to send a message. You're chuckling softly, picturing a priest muttering, "Here's your eternity starter pack. Don't spend it all in one place." The humor's dark, but it fits the vibe of this tomb, where everything feels like it's hiding a punchline nobody's explaining. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep things lively. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who debate hieroglyphs over breakfast, suggest certain offerings were symbolic cancellations meant to limit a soul's power in the afterlife. Picture a bowl that's empty on purpose, not because they ran out of snacks, but to say you're not eating in the duat, lady. It's a wild theory, but it tracks with this queen's whole erased identity deal. The reeds, too, are odd. Reeds were tied to writing and wisdom. These are brittle, useless, like someone was saying, "No papyrus for you." You're grinning now, imagining a priest tossing in the reeds like he's throwing shade in plant form. Historians still argue whether these sparse offerings were a punishment or a precaution. Some say it's a sign of disgrace, like the ancient equivalent of giving someone a single sock for Christmas. Others think it's protective, meant to keep her soul low-key so it wouldn't attract trouble from gods or spirits. You're leaning toward the punishment angle, mostly because the whole tomb screams, "We're done with you." You're thinking about the priests again, their hands steady as they place these offerings. Were they nervous, angry, or just doing their job like baristas slinging coffee during a morning rush? Let's dive into that scene. You're one of those priests now standing in this hidden chamber, the air heavy with incense and secrecy. Your linen robes sticking to your skin, and you're holding that chipped bowl, wondering why the vizier insisted on something so plain. You've buried queens before piles of bread, jars of wine, amulets that sparkle like the Nile at sunrise. But this time the orders are clear, keep it minimal. You place the bowl, the reeds, the vial, your hands moving fast because the high priest is watching, his eyes sharp like a hawk's. You're wondering what this queen did to deserve this. Did she betray someone? Speak out of turn. You're tempted to whisper a prayer for her, but you don't. Instead, you mutter, "Hope you like reeds because that's all you're getting." You laugh to yourself, but the chamber's silence swallows it. Back to you, the explorer. You're picking up the alabaster vial now, turning it over in your hands. It's light empty, but there's a faint trace of something inside. Maybe lotus oil tying back to that half-finished carving you keep seeing. The lotus is everywhere in this tomb, like a signature nobody's claiming. You're thinking about the workers who carried these offerings in their sandals, shuffling in the dark. Did they know what they meant? Did they whisper about it later over bowls of barley stew? Their voices low so the gods wouldn't overhear. You're imagining one of them, a wiry guy with the scar on his cheek, saying, "This queen's afterlife is going to be the worst picnic ever." The offerings are starting to feel like a code, each one a piece of the puzzle. The bowl's emptiness, the reed's brittleness, the vial's crack. They're not random. You're wondering if they're tied to the silencing ritual you thought about earlier, the one that sealed her lips with resin. Maybe it's all part of the same plan. No name, no face, no voice, and now no proper offerings. It's like someone wanted her to fade into the afterlife like a bad dream. You're picturing the scene, a torchlit chamber, a handful of priests, maybe a scribe taking notes nobody's allowed to read, One of them probably tripped over a reed and cursed under his breath. And you're chuckling again, imagining the gods face-palming in the background. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure Greco-Roman texts mention offerings that were inverted items chosen to represent what the dead couldn't have. An empty bowl for hunger, broken reeds for silence, a cracked vial for lost beauty. It's like the ancient Egyptians invented passive-aggressive gift-giving. You're picturing a priest, maybe a bit of a prankster, smirking as he places the vial knowing it's a jab at the queen's legacy. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity feels like the only thing that makes sense. You're laughing softly, the sound echoing off the walls like it's joining the chorus of secrets. You're standing now your torch, casting a warm glow on the shelf. The offerings are sparse, but they're heavy with meaning, like a minimalist painting that costs $1 million. You're wondering what else this chamber's hiding. Maybe another tablet, maybe a clue to her dynasty. You're thinking about that lotus again, its stubborn presence in a tomb that's all about absence. You're hooked, and the tomb's starting to feel like a story that's only half told. You're ready to keep going to see what other strange gifts this nameless queen was left with, and what they say about her erased life. You're still in the hidden chamber. The sparse offerings, a chipped bowl, brittle reeds, a cracked vial sitting on the stone shelf like a cryptic message from a forgotten grudge. Your torchlight flickers, painting the rough walls with shadows that seem to shift when you're not looking. The air's heavy, tinged with that resinous whiff that's starting to feel like an old friend. You're here to search for the queen's lost titles, the royal names and roles that should have been carved into every inch of this tomb, but are nowhere to be found. It's like someone took her crown, her name, and her entire LinkedIn profile and tossed them into the Nile. You're determined to figure out why. Picture yourself running your fingers along the wall, searching for any trace of a title, great royal wife, God's wife of Amun, anything that would have defined her. In ancient Egypt, a queen's titles were her power, her immortality etched in stone to ensure the gods knew who she was. Mainstream records like the stele from Karnak show queens like Hatshepsut or Nefertari draped in titles that screamed importance. Mistress of the two lands, beloved of Maat. But this queen, her tomb's as silent as a temple after closing hours. You're starting to think her titles weren't just forgotten. They were deliberately erased like someone wanted her royal resume shredded. You're circling the chamber now, your sandals scuffing against the uneven floor. The walls are bare, but you spot a faint patch where the limestone looks smoother, like it was polished to hide something. You're imagining a cartouche, maybe one that once held King's mother or daughter of Ra, sanded down until it was just a ghost of a name. You're chuckling softly, picturing an ancient scribe with a guilty look muttering, "Oops, my chisel slipped. Guess she's nobody now." The humor's dark, but it fits this tomb's vibe where every detail feels like a calculated snub. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep you awake just barely. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who hoard papyrus scraps in their basements, suggest that certain queens' titles were erased to prevent their souls from claiming power in the afterlife. Think of it like revoking someone's VIP pass to the Duat. There's a wild story from the Third Intermediate Period about a queen whose titles were stripped. Because she meddled in temple politics, her name replaced with the generic Lady of the House. You're grinning now, imagining her soul showing up at the gates of the afterlife, arguing with Anubis like, "Excuse me, I'm supposed to be on the list." But the grin fades as you realize how serious this was without titles. She's just a shadow unrecognizable to the gods. Historians still argue whether this erasure was political, religious, or personal. Some say she was a minor queen, a secondary wife whose name wasn't worth keeping. Others think she was a major player, maybe a regent like Myrneith, whose power threatened someone enough to wipe her slate clean. You're leaning toward the big deal theory mostly because nobody goes to this much trouble to erase a nobody. You're picturing a palace conspiracy, whispered meetings in torchlit halls, a vizier with a twitchy eye insisting her titles vanish. You're wondering if she was a queen who stepped on the wrong toes, maybe challenged a pharaoh or a priest who didn't like being outshined. Let's dive into that scene. You're a scribe now standing in this hidden chamber, your reed pen trembling as you face a blank wall. You've carved titles before grand ones, the kind that make your hand cramp from all the glyphs. But today the orders are clear, no titles, no name, just smooth stone. You're confused because queens don't get buried like this. You're picturing her a woman with coal-lined eyes, maybe a sharp tongue, someone who commanded rooms. You're tempted to sneak in a tiny glyph, maybe beloved of Horus, just to give her something. But the priest is watching his sistrum, rattling like a warning. You mutter, "This is why I don't do palace jobs and keep sanding your heart heavy with the weight of her erasure." Back to you, the explorer. You're kneeling now, your torch held close to that polished patch. It's not just smooth. It's too smooth, like someone spent hours making sure no trace of her remained. You're thinking about that lotus carving, the half-finished one that keeps popping up like a stubborn clue. Maybe it's a hint at her title. Lotuses were tied to royalty, to goddesses like Hathor. You're wondering if she was a lotus of the two lands, a title so rare it's barely mentioned in surviving texts. You're imagining the workers who did this, their hands steady, but their minds racing. Did they know her? Did they whisper her titles in secret over bowls of lentils, their voices low to avoid trouble? Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure late-period texts mention a ritual where a queen's titles were transferred to a goddess like Isis or Hathor to keep her power from causing chaos. Picture a priest maybe a bit too into his myrrh incense chanting to redirect her titles to the heavens, leaving her tomb blank. It's like forwarding her mail to the gods and hoping they deal with it. You're chuckling again, imagining the gods getting a package labeled Queen TBD and wondering who sent it. But in this tomb, the idea doesn't feel so far-fetched. It's all about control, about keeping her power locked away. You're standing now, your torch casting a warm glow on the walls. You notice something else, a tiny chip in the stone, barely visible where a glyph might have started. It's not a lotus this time, but a reed, the symbol of writing and wisdom. It's like the tomb's teasing you, dropping breadcrumbs that lead nowhere. You're thinking about the scribes again, the ones who knew her titles but kept silent. Did they feel guilty? Did they sneak hints into the tomb hoping someone like you would find them? You're picturing one of them, a wiry guy with ink-stained fingers, muttering, "This queen deserved better than this erasure nonsense." The chamber's starting to feel smaller, the air pressing against your chest, like it's urging you to move on. You're wondering what's next. Maybe another hidden room, maybe a clue to her dynasty. The lack of titles isn't just a mystery. It's a statement, a deliberate act to strip her of everything that made her royal. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are piling up like sand in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen story reveals, but you can't shake the feeling that her titles are out there hidden, just beyond your reach. You're still in the hidden chamber, the faint glow of your torch bouncing off the rough walls, where that chipped reed glyph taunts you like a half-finished sentence. The air's thick, carrying that familiar resin and myrrh scent that's starting to feel like the tomb's signature perfume. The sparse offerings cracked vile brittle reeds. Empty bowl are behind you, and you're now fixated on the burial goods, or rather the lack of them. You're here to inspect the cryptic, almost insultingly minimal possessions left with this nameless queen, each one a riddle wrapped in a mystery like a gift shop trinket nobody wanted. It's not just about what's here, it's about what's missing, and why someone decided her afterlife deserved the bare minimum. Picture yourself kneeling by the stone shelf again, your torch held low to catch every detail. The chamber's cramped the ceiling so low you're half crouched, and the silence is so heavy it feels like it's sitting on your shoulders. In ancient Egypt, burial goods were a status symbol mainstream archaeology. Like the finds in Nefertari's tomb, shows queens buried with gilded furniture, jars of perfume, even chariots for cruising the afterlife. But this queen, her haul is pathetic, that chipped bowl, the brittle reeds, the cracked alabaster vial, and now on closer inspection, a single faded linen scrap barely big enough to wrap a sandwich. You're chuckling softly, imagining a priest tossing it in like, "Here's your eternity wardrobe, don't expect a fashion show." The humor's dark, but it fits this tomb's vibe of deliberate neglect. You're examining the linen now, holding it up to the torchlight. It's frayed with faint traces of blue dye, maybe once vibrant, now dulled like a forgotten memory. It's not the fine linen you'd expect for a queen, more like something a servant might use to wipe down a table. You're wondering why it's here at all. Was it a mistake? Oh, placeholder. Or part of the same strange ritual that sealed her lips and erased her face? You're thinking about the Book of the Dead, which lists offerings like shabti figurines, tiny servants to do your afterlife chores. This queen doesn't even have one of those, like she's expected to vacuum the duat herself. You're grinning now, picturing her soul grumbling. Seriously, not even a single shabti budget cuts much. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep things light. Some fringe Egyptologists, probably the ones who collect broken pottery for fun, suggest that minimal burial goods were sometimes a symbolic reset, meant to strip a soul of earthly ties. Picture a priest all serious with his shaved head and coal-lined eyes, explaining that an empty tomb keeps the soul humble like a spiritual Marie Kondo, decluttering her afterlife. It's a wild idea, but it tracks with this queen's erased identity, no name, no face, no titles, and now no proper goods. You're laughing softly, imagining her soul showing up in the afterlife, with just a linty linen scrap like she's stuck in eternal lost and found. Historians still argue whether these sparse goods were a punishment or a ritual quirk. Some say it's a sign of disgrace, like burying her with the ancient equivalent of a dollar store gift bag. Others think it's intentional minimalism, maybe, to keep her soul from drawing attention in the afterlife. You're leaning toward the punishment angle, mostly because the whole tomb feels like someone saying, "You're not worth the good stuff." You're picturing the priests who placed these items, their hands quick, their faces blank. Were they following orders from a vindictive pharaoh, a jealous rival, or maybe a temple council that wanted her forgotten for reasons nobody dared write down? Let's dive into that scene. You're a priest now standing in this hidden chamber, the air thick with dust and the weight of secrecy. Your linen robe's itching, and you're holding that cracked vial, its faint lotus scent barely noticeable. You've buried queens before piles of jewelry jars of wine amulets that gleam like stars. But today the orders are clear. Keep it basic. You place the vial, the reeds, the bowl, and that sad linen scrap. Your movement's mechanical because the high priest is watching his staff tapping like a metronome. You're wondering what this queen did. Did she challenge the gods? Steal someone's throne? You're tempted to slip in a proper offering, maybe a tiny amulet, but you don't. You mutter, Hope you like minimalism because this is it, and step back your heart, heavy with the silence. Back to you, the explorer. You're setting the linen down now, careful not to tear it further. It feels like a clue, but it's so vague it's frustrating, like a text message with no context. You're thinking about that lotus scent in the vial tying back to the half-finished carvings you keep finding. The lotus is everywhere, a stubborn hint in a tomb that's all about absence. You're wondering if its symbolic lotuses meant rebirth, but this queen's rebirth feels like it was canceled before it started. You're imagining the workers who carried these goods in their sandals, scuffing in the dark. Did they know why her tomb was so empty? Did they whisper about it later over flatbread and beer? Their voices low, like they were sharing ghost stories. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the New Kingdom mention negative offerings items chosen to represent what the dead can't have. An empty bowl for hunger, a cracked vial for lost luxury, a frayed linen for a stripped identity. It's like the ancient Egyptians invented the art of subtle shade. You're picturing a priest, maybe a bit of a cynic, smirking as he places the linen, knowing it's a jab at her status. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity is the only thing that feels right. You're chuckling again, the sound echoing like it's joining the tomb's chorus of secrets. You're standing now, your torch casting a warm glow on the shelf. The burial goods are so sparse they're almost mocking, like someone wanted her to know she's been demoted in death. You're wondering what's next. Maybe another hidden chamber, maybe a clue to her dynasty. You're thinking about the scribes who might have known her story, the ones who left that clay tablet you found earlier. Did they sneak in these sad offerings as a protest? A tiny act of defiance. You're picturing one of them, a wiry guy with a tired grin, muttering, "This queen deserved better than a lousy linen scrap." The chamber's starting to feel like a trap, the air pressing against you like it's daring you to keep digging. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are piling up like dust in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what other clues this nameless queen's burial holds. But you can't shake the feeling that these goods are telling you something bigger. Something about why she was erased so completely. You're still in the hidden chamber. The sparse burial goods chipped bowl. Brittle reeds cracked vial. And that sad linen scrap sitting on the shelf like a minimalist art exhibit gone wrong. Your torchlight flickers, casting jittery shadows that make the rough walls seem to pulse, and the air's heavy with that resin and myrrh scent that's become your constant companion. You're here to observe temple rites that might hint at this nameless queen's identity rituals that could explain why her tomb is a masterclass in erasure. The lotus motif, that stubborn, half-finished carving, keeps nagging at you like a song stuck in your head. You're starting to think the answers lie not just in this tomb, but in the sacred spaces where priests once chanted her into oblivion. Picture yourself stepping back from the shelf, your sandals scuffing the dusty floor, and imagining the temple where this queen's final rites were performed. It's not the grand Karnak complex with its towering columns, but something smaller, maybe a quiet sanctuary near Memphis, where the air hums with incense and secrecy. In ancient Egypt, temple rites were the ultimate send-off mainstream texts, like the ritual of the divine cult. Describe priests chanting burning myrrh and offering prayers to guide royals to the afterlife. For a queen, you'd expect a full orchestra of sistrums, harps, and wails, with priests pulling out all the stops to impress Osiris. But this queen, her rites feel like they were done in a hurry, like a ceremony planned by someone who forgot the guest of honor. You're picturing the scene now, a torchlit temple, the walls painted with gods who look like they're judging everyone. A handful of priests, maybe 3 or 4, are gathered around an altar, their voices low, their movements precise. They're not chanting praises, they're muttering spells that sound like they're locking something away. You're chuckling softly, imagining one priest, probably the junior guy, tripping over his robe and dropping a sistrum mid-ritual, earning a death glare from the high priest. The humor's light, but it fades as you realize how serious this was. These rites weren't about celebration. They were about containment, like sealing a jar you don't want opened. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep you grounded. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who argue over hieroglyph fonts at dinner parties, suggest certain temple rites were designed to redirect a soul's power, channeling it to a goddess like Hathor or Isis instead of the deceased. Picture a priest all serious with his leopard skin cloak, waving incense like he's redirecting spiritual Wi-Fi to keep the queen's soul offline. It's a wild theory, but it fits this tomb's vibe. No name, no face, no titles, and now maybe no divine spotlight. You're grinning now, imagining her soul showing up in the afterlife, confused, like, wait, I didn't sign up for this goddess handoff. But the grin fades as you realize how deliberate this was. Someone wanted her out of the cosmic picture. Historians still argue whether these rites were standard for a disgraced queen or something unique to her. Some say they were a stripped-down version of normal rituals, like a budget funeral for a royal nobody could afford to honor. Others think they were customized, maybe to appease a god she'd angered, or to protect the living from her influence. You're leaning toward the customized angle, mostly because the tomb's whole setup screams special case. You're imagining a high priest, his face lined with worry, consulting a scroll that's less about blessings and more about containment. You're wondering if she was a queen, like a Mos Nefertari, a divine figure whose power scared the priesthood into silencing her. Let's dive into that temple scene. You're a priest now standing in the sanctuary, the air thick with myrrh and tension. Your hands are sweaty, gripping a bronze censer that's too hot to hold comfortably. The high priest is chanting, his voice low and rhythmic, like a lullaby with teeth. The words aren't the usual Hail to Ra stuff you're hearing, phrases about binding the Kai and silencing the voice of eternity. You're supposed to add your voice, but you're distracted wondering why this queen's getting the spiritual equivalent of a gag order. You've seen grand burials before, piles of offerings, crowds of mourners, but this one's just you two other priests and a vibe that screams, let's get this over with. You mutter, this is why I stick to temple inventory and swing the censer, hoping nobody notices your shaky hands. Back to you, the explorer. You're back in the hidden chamber, your torch casting a warm glow on the walls. You notice something new, a faint smudge near the shelf like soot from an ancient incense burner. It's a tiny clue, but it ties to those temple rites, the ones that left this queen with nothing but a chipped bowl and a bad reputation. You're thinking about that lotus again, the half-finished carving that's become your tomb tour guide. Lotuses were sacred to Hathor, the goddess of love and rebirth, but also a deity priests invoked to calm restless souls. You're wondering if the rites involved Hathor, maybe a plea to keep this queen's spirit from stirring up trouble. You're picturing a priest, his voice soft but firm, offering a lotus to the goddess while avoiding the queen's name like it's cursed. Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the late period mention a ritual where priests burned silent incense, a mix of myrrh and rare herbs, meant to mute a soul's presence in the afterlife. Picture a priest, maybe a bit of a show-off, tossing herbs into a brazier, like he's auditioning for a cooking show, all while chanting about eternal quiet. It's absurd, but it fits this tomb's obsession with silent sealed lips, faceless coffin, and now maybe a ritual designed to keep her soul on mute. You're chuckling again, the sound, bouncing off the walls like it's joining the tomb's secret choir. You're moving now, your torch held high, searching for more clues. The smudge of soot leads your eye to a corner where the wall's slightly uneven, like it was patched in a hurry. You're wondering if it hides another chamber, another piece of this puzzle. You're thinking about the priests again, the ones who performed these rites. Did they believe in what they were doing? Did they whisper about her later? Their voices low over cups of barley beer? You're picturing one of them, a wiry guy with a tired grin, muttering that Queen's rites were weirder than a crocodile in a kilt. The chamber's starting to feel like a dead end, but the clues, the soot, the lotus, the sparse goods are piling up. You're wondering if the temple rites were the final nail in her coffin, the last step in erasing her from eternity. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are stacking up like papyrus in a scribe's office. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen's story reveals, but you can't shake the feeling that those rites were more than just a goodbye. They were a lock on a door nobody wanted opened. You're still in the hidden chamber, the faint smudge of soot on the wall lingering in your mind like a clue you can't quite grasp. Your torchlight flickers, casting shadows that twist across the uneven stone, and the air's thick with that resin and myrrh scent that's starting to feel like the tomb's heartbeat. You're here to explore why the scribes erased this nameless queen from history, their pens silent when they should have been carving her name into eternity. The sparse offerings, the faceless coffin, the sealed lips, all of it points to a deliberate cover-up. And now you're digging into the role of the scribes, the keepers of Egypt's stories who chose to leave her out of the record. Picture yourself back by the stone shelf, the cracked vial and brittle reed sitting there like props in a play nobody showed up to watch. You're imagining a scribe's workshop not far from this tomb, where papyrus scrolls pile up like laundry and the air smells of ink and ambition. In ancient Egypt, scribes were the backbone of history. Mainstream records like the Annals of Thutmose III show they documented everything from pharaoh's victories to grain harvests. They were the ones who carved queens' names into stelae, ensuring their souls could strut into the afterlife with a proper resume. But this queen, her name's nowhere, not even a whisper on a dusty scroll. You're starting to think the scribes weren't just forgetful. They were following orders to make her vanish. You're crouching now, your torch held close to the clay tablet you found earlier, its faint scratches taunting you. It's not hieroglyphs, not exactly, more like a scribbled note, the kind a scribe might jot down when nobody's looking. You're picturing a scribe, maybe a young guy with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch, sitting in this chamber thousands of years ago. He's supposed to carve her name, her titles, her story, but instead he's sanding the walls, smooth erasing every trace. You're chuckling softly, imagining him muttering, "This is why I should have been a potter. Less drama." The humor's light, but it fades as you realize how heavy this was. Erasing a queen's name was like deleting her soul's Wi-Fi signal. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep things lively. Some fringe Egyptologists, probably the ones who argue over papyrus margins at midnight, suggest scribes sometimes left ghost marks, tiny hidden symbols, to hint at erased names without breaking their oaths. Picture a scribe sneaking a reed glyph into a corner like a secret handshake for posterity. You're grinning now, imagining this scribe as the ancient equivalent of a whistleblower, leaving a clue for someone like you to find. But the grin fades as you realize how risky that was. Defying orders in a culture where the gods were always watching could get you demoted to cleaning the temple latrines. Historians still argue whether the scribe's silence was forced or voluntary. Some say they were coerced, maybe by a vizier with a vendetta, or a pharaoh who wanted her forgotten. Others think the scribes themselves chose to erase her, maybe to protect sacred knowledge, or maintain Mahat the cosmic order. You're leaning toward coercion mostly because the tomb's whole vibe screams someone powerful wanted her gone. You're picturing a scribe, his reed pen trembling, facing a high priest who's all business, his staff tapping like a countdown. The priest says, "No name, no titles," and the scribe complies, but not without sneaking that tablet into the chamber, a tiny act of rebellion. Let's dive into that scene. You're the scribe now hunched over a papyrus in a dimly lit workshop, the air thick with ink and tension. Your hands are cramped from hours of writing, and you're surrounded by scrolls detailing grain taxes and temple offerings. But today's job is different. A priest, his eyes sharp like a falcon's hands. You a blank scroll and says, "The queen gets nothing." You're confused because queens always get the full treatment Cartouche's hymns. The works? You're picturing her a woman with a commanding presence, maybe a sharp wit that got her in trouble. You're tempted to scribble her name just a glyph or two, but the priest's watching his sistrum, rattling like a warning. You mutter, "This is why I hate palace gigs," and start sanding the stone, your heart heavy with her absence. Back to you, the explorer. You're holding the tablet again, turning it over in your hands. It scratches, catching the torchlight. It's not much, but it feels like a lifeline. A hint that someone wanted her remembered, even if just a little. You're thinking about that lotus carving, the half-finished one that keeps showing up like a ghost. Maybe it's tied to her name. A lotus was a symbol of rebirth, but also of royal women like Nefertari. You're wondering if the scribe who left this tablet knew her, maybe admired her, and risked everything to leave a clue. You're picturing him a wiry guy with a tired grin, whispering to his friend, "This queen deserved better than a blank wall." Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the New Kingdom mention scribes using silent glyph symbols that look like mistakes, but carry hidden meanings. Picture a reed glyph that's not just a reed, it's a code for a name, a title, maybe even a warning. You're imagining a scribe maybe a bit of a rebel carving that reed you saw earlier, knowing it might never be read, but hoping it would. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity feels like truth. You're chuckling again, the sound echoing like it's joining the tomb's secret chorus, picturing the scribe winking at the gods like, "Catch me breaking the rules." You're moving now your torch, casting a warm glow on the walls. You notice another faint mark, barely visible, a line that might be a glyph, might be nothing. It's frustrating, like trying to read a text message with no signal. You're thinking about the scribes again, the ones who knew her story but kept quiet. Did they feel guilty? Did they whisper about her over cups of barley beer, their voices low to avoid the gods' ears? You're picturing one of them, his hands still dusty from sand and muttering. This queen's story is bigger than they're letting on. The chamber's starting to feel like a vault, not just for her body, but for her story, locked away by scribes who knew too much and said too little. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are piling up like sand in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen's erasure reveals. You're still in the hidden chamber, the clay tablet's faint scratches glinting under your torch like a secret begging to be read. The air's thick, heavy with that resin and myrrh scent that's practically the tomb's wallpaper by now. The walls seem to lean in their rough surfaces, hiding more than they reveal. And you're here to question whether divine punishment was behind this nameless queen's erasure, her name, face, and voice wiped out like she offended the gods themselves. That lotus carving, the half-finished one that keeps haunting you, feels like a clue to something bigger, maybe a divine grudge. You're starting to think this tomb isn't just a burial, it's a cosmic timeout. Picture yourself standing in the chamber's center, your torch casting a warm glow that makes the shadows dance like they're mocking you. In ancient Egypt, the gods were the ultimate enforcers. Mainstream texts, like the Amduat, describe them judging souls in the afterlife, weighing hearts against Mayat's feather to decide who gets eternal VIP status. A queen's burial was supposed to butter up the gods with offerings and spells to ensure a smooth ride to the field of reeds. But this queen, her tomb's lack of bling, her sealed lips, and that faceless coffin suggests someone thought she'd ticked off the divine council. You're imagining a god like Amun, all stern with his ram horns, shaking his head like, "Not today, lady." You're chuckling softly, picturing her soul trying to argue her case in the afterlife court, only to find her files been shredded. You're circling the chamber now, your sandals stirring up dust that swirls like tiny ghosts. You're thinking about that clay tablet, the one with scratches that might be a scribe's rebellion. Could it hint at why the gods were angry? Maybe she broke a sacred vow, or worse, challenged a deity's ego. Egyptian gods weren't exactly known for humility. You're picturing a temple scene, priests in a panic, their incense burning too fast, muttering about divine wrath. You're grinning now, imagining one priest, probably the rookie, whispering, "Did she really tell Ra his chariot's outdated?" The humor's light, but it fades as you realize how serious this was. Erasing a queen's identity wasn't just human politics. It might have been a divine decree. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep you grounded. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who name their kids after obscure deities, suggest certain burials were designed to appease angry gods by unmaking the deceased. Picture a ritual where priests symbolically erased a queen's identity to calm a god's tantrum, like offering a cosmic apology note. It's wild, but it fits this tomb's vibe. No name, no face, just a big sorry to the heavens. You're laughing softly, imagining Osiris getting a memo that says, "Please ignore this queen, she's been cancelled." But the laughter fades as you realize how deliberate this was. Someone believed her erasure was the price of keeping the gods happy. Historians still argue whether divine punishment was the motive here. Some say she was a heretic, like a mini Akhenaten pushing a god the priest didn't like. Others think it was precaution, not punishment, erasing her to prevent her soul from stirring up divine drama. You're leaning toward punishment, mostly because the tomb's whole setup feels like someone saying, "You messed up and the gods aren't forgiving." You're picturing a high priest, his face grim, consulting oracles in a smoky temple, their voices warning of a queen whose actions tipped Mayat's scales. You're wondering if she was a rebel, maybe a queen like Hatshepsut, who dared to play pharaoh and paid the price. Let's dive into that scene. You're a priest now, standing in a temple courtyard under a starry sky, the air thick with myrrh and dread. Your hands clutch a censer, the heat stinging your palms as you chant prayers to appease Amun. The high priest is pacing his staff, clicking on the stone, muttering about a queen who offended the divine order. You're not sure what she did. Maybe she built a shrine to the wrong god, or spoke out against the priesthood's rules. The oracles, their eyes glazed from lotus wine, whisper that her name must be erased to restore balance. You're supposed to help, but you're distracted, wondering if the gods are really this petty. You mutter, "This is why I stick to offering bread and swing the censer, hoping nobody notices your doubt." Back to you, the explorer. You're back by the tablet, your torch casting a warm glow on its surface. The scratches are starting to look like they might form a symbol, a reed maybe, or a lotus. You're thinking about that half-finished lotus carving again, its stubborn presence in this tomb of absence. Lotuses were tied to Hathor, but also to rebirth. And you're wondering if the gods were angry because she claimed too much divine power. Maybe she called herself Daughter of Ra one too many times. You're picturing the priests who buried her. Their hands quick, their voices low as if the gods were listening. Did they believe she deserved this? Did they whisper about her later over cups of barley beer, their voices hushed like they were sharing a ghost story? Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the late period mention a ritual called the unbinding of Ma'at, where a soul's identity was erased to prevent it from challenging divine order. Picture a priest maybe a bit too into his incense, chanting to strip her name like he's defragging a cosmic hard drive. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity feels like the truth. You're chuckling again, imagining the gods rolling their eyes as they get a report about a queen who needed to be unbound. The sound echoes off the walls, joining the tomb's secret symphony. You're moving now, your torch held high, searching for more clues. You notice a faint crack in the wall, not the one you came through, but another smaller one like a seam in the stone. It's barely visible, but it's enough to make you wonder if there's another chamber, another layer to this divine punishment theory. You're thinking about the scribes again, the ones who left that tablet. Did they know about the god's wrath? Did they sneak in a hint, hoping someone like you would find it? You're picturing one of them, a wiry guy with a tired grin, muttering, "This queen's in trouble with the gods, and now so are we." The chamber is starting to feel like a divine courtroom, the air pressing against you like a verdict. You're hooked, and the tomb's secrets are piling up like offerings to a forgotten god. You're ready to keep going to see what else this nameless queen story reveals. You're still in the hidden chamber, the faint crack in the wall, teasing you like a door you're not sure you want to open. Your torchlight flickers, casting shadows that twist across the rough stone, and the air's thick with that resin and myrrh scent that's practically the tomb's calling card. You're here to learn what the tomb builders whispered about this nameless queen, the secrets they shared when the priests weren't listening. The clay tablet, the sparse offerings, and that stubborn half-finished lotus carving, keep circling in your mind, each one a breadcrumb in a trail that's leading somewhere dark. You're starting to think the workers, those calloused hands that carved this place, knew more about her erasure than anyone else. Picture yourself running your fingers along the cracked wall, feeling the uneven stone where the builders left their mark. In ancient Egypt, tomb builders were more than laborers. They were skilled artisans, often sworn to secrecy, as mainstream records like the Deir el Medina archives show. They lived in villages, worked in crews, and gossiped about their projects over bowls of barley stew. For a queen's tomb, they'd usually be carving grand scenes of gods and glory, but this one, it's bare like they were told to keep it simple and shut up about it. You're imagining a worker, his hands dusty from chiseling, whispering to his mate about a queen nobody's allowed to name. You're chuckling softly, picturing him muttering, "This job's weirder than a hippo in a kilt." The humor's light, but it fades as you realize how heavy their silence was. They knew something and they kept it quiet. You're kneeling now, your torch held close to the crack, searching for any sign of the builder's work. There's a faint chisel mark, not a glyph, just a nick like someone got distracted mid-swing. It's not much, but it feels personal, like a worker left it as a tiny rebellion against the orders to erase her. You're thinking about the village where these builders lived, probably near Thebes, where mud brick houses baked under the sun. They'd go home after a long day, their backs aching, and talk about the tomb over flickering oil lamps. You're picturing one of them a grizzled mason with a scar in his cheek, lowering his voice to say, "This queen's trouble even dead." You're wondering what they knew. Did they hear rumors about her? Did they see something in the tomb that made them nervous? Here's a quirky tidbit to keep things lively. Some fringe archaeologists, probably the ones who collect broken chisels for fun, suggest workers sometimes left hidden marks in tombs. Not glyphs, but subtle scratches to hint at forbidden knowledge. Picture a mason sneaking a nick into the stone like a secret handshake for future explorers. You're grinning now, imagining this worker as the ancient equivalent of a graffiti artist, leaving a tag that says, "I was here and so was she." But the grin fades as you realize how risky that was. Defying orders in a culture where priests could ruin your life was no small thing. These builders knew something, and they carried it like a weight. Historians still argue whether the workers were in on the erasure or just following orders. Some say they were clueless, just doing their job under tight supervision. Others think they were trusted insiders sworn to secrecy because they knew why she was erased. Maybe a scandal, maybe a divine slight. You're leaning toward the insider angle mostly because the tomb's precision. The smooth walls, the careful absence feels like the work of people who understood the stakes. You're picturing a crew leader, his face lined from years in the sun, warning his team to keep quiet or face the wrath of a vizier. You're wondering if they whispered about her anyway, their voices low to avoid the god's ears. Let's dive into that scene. You're a worker now standing in this hidden chamber, your chisel heavy in your hand. The air's thick with dust and the torchlight makes your shadow dance like it's mocking you. You're supposed to carve a simple chamber, no frills, no names, just stone. The priest overseeing you is pacing his staff, clicking like a countdown, and you're wondering why this queen's getting the silent treatment. You've built tombs before, grand ones with walls shouting praises to Ra, but this one's different. You hear rumors she angered someone powerful, maybe a god, maybe a pharaoh. You're tempted to carve a tiny lotus just to give her something, but the priest watching. You mutter, "This is why I should have been a brewer," and keep chiseling your heart heavy with her secret. Back to you, the explorer. You're tracing that chisel mark now, your fingers brushing the stone like it's a letter from the past. It's not much, but it feels like a connection to those workers, the ones who knew her story but couldn't tell it. You're thinking about that lotus carving again, the half-finished one that's become your tomb GPS. Lotuses were tied to rebirth, but also to secrets. Maybe the workers used it as a nod to her hidden identity. You're picturing them back in their village, sitting around a fire, their voices low as they trade stories. One of them, maybe the young guy who left that chisel mark, says, "She was someone important, but they don't want us talking." Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the New Kingdom mention workers leaving silent signs marks that look like mistakes, but carry meaning: a scratch for a name, a nick for a title. Picture a mason, maybe a bit of a rebel, sneaking that chisel mark into the wall, knowing it might never be seen, but hoping it will. It's absurd, but in this tomb, absurdity feels like truth. You're chuckling again, imagining the worker winking at the stone like, "Catch me breaking the rules for a queen nobody remembers." The sound echoes, joining the tomb's secret chorus. You're moving now, your torch casting a warm glow on the walls. You notice another mark, fainter than the first, near the floor. A line that might be a reed, might be nothing. It's frustrating, like trying to read a faded note. You're thinking about the workers again, the ones who built this place under orders to keep it blank. Did they feel guilty? Did they whisper her name in secret over cups of beer? Their voices hushed like they were sharing a ghost story? You're picturing one of them, a wiry guy with a tired grin, muttering, "This queen's story is bigger than these walls." The chamber's starting to feel like a vault for their secrets, too. The air pressing against you like a warning. You're hooked, and the tomb's mysteries are piling up like sand in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what else the builder's whispers reveal about this nameless queen. You're still in the hidden chamber, the faint chisel mark on the wall, lingering in your mind like a whisper from the past. Your torchlight dances across the rough stone, casting shadows that seem to slink away when you look too closely. And the air's thick with that resin and myrrh scent that's practically the tomb's signature by now. You're here to face the archaeological dead ends, the gaps in this nameless queen story that scholars can't crack, no matter how many papyri they unroll. The lotus carving the sparse offerings and that cryptic clay tablet keep circling in your thoughts, each one a puzzle piece that doesn't quite fit. You're starting to feel like you're chasing a ghost who doesn't want to be found. Picture yourself standing in the chamber's center, your sandals stirring up dust that swirls like tiny spirits in the torchlight. In ancient Egypt, tombs were like history books carved in stone. Mainstream archaeology, like the studies of the Valley of the Queens, shows they were packed with names, titles, and stories to ensure immortality. But this queen's tomb, it's a blank page, a deliberate void that's got scholars scratching their heads. You're imagining a dusty university office, Egyptologists arguing over coffee-stained notes, trying to pin her to a dynasty, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, maybe even Greco-Roman. But every lead fizzles out like a torch in a sandstorm. You're chuckling softly, picturing one scholar, probably with a beard that's seen better days, muttering, "This queen's giving me more gray hairs than Akhenaten." The humor's light, but it fades as you realize how frustrating this tomb is, a puzzle with half the pieces missing. You're kneeling now, your torch held close to the wall, searching for anything the builders might have left. That faint chisel mark you found earlier feels like a taunt, a hint that leads nowhere. You're thinking about the artifacts in this tomb. The chipped bowl, the brittle wreaths, the cracked vial, that sad linen scrap. They're not enough to ID her, not even close. Archaeologists love a good artifact, something to carbon date or squint at under a microscope. But this tomb's stingy offering, just enough to tease and not enough to solve. You're picturing a dig site maybe in the 1920s when this tomb was first uncovered. The excavators, sweating under their pith helmets, probably thought they'd hit the jackpot until they realized it was a royal tomb with no name, no face, no answers. Here's a quirky tidbit to keep things lively. Some fringe archaeologists, probably the ones who collect scarab paperweights, suggest this tomb might be a decoy built to throw off looters or even scholars hiding the real burial elsewhere. Picture a fake tomb stocked with just enough junk to look legit, while the queen's actual resting place is chilling under a different dune. You're grinning now, imagining ancient Egyptians pulling a cosmic prank like good luck, future nerds. But the grin fades as you realize how unlikely that is. This tomb's erasure feels too deliberate, too personal to be a mere decoy. It's not about hiding treasure, it's about hiding her. Historians still argue whether this tomb's emptiness is a dead end or a clue in itself. Some say it's a sign of damnatio memoriae, the ancient equivalent of canceling someone, wiping their name from history. Others think it's incomplete, maybe abandoned when a dynasty fell or a budget ran dry. You're leaning toward the cancellation angle, mostly because the tomb's precision, the smooth walls, the sealed lips, the faceless coffin, feels like someone went out of their way to say, "You don't exist." You're picturing a vizier, his eyes cold, ordering the tomb sealed with minimal fuss, maybe to appease a god or silence a scandal. You're wondering if she was a queen like Taye, whose influence made enemies nervous, or a lesser wife caught in a power play. Let's dive into that scene. You're an excavator now, standing in this chamber in 1925, your lantern casting a feeble glow. The air's thick with dust and your team's buzzing with excitement, until you realize there's no name, no treasure, just a bunch of broken junk. You're supposed to catalog everything, but there's barely anything to write down. The head archaeologist probably chain-smoking snaps. This queen's a ghost, and she's wasting my time. You're tempted to scribble a note about that lotus carving, the one you keep seeing. But you don't. You're too busy wondering why this tomb feels like a locked door with no key. You mutter, "This is why I should have studied pottery and brush away the dust, hoping for a miracle." Back to you, the explorer. You're tracing that chisel mark again. Your fingers brushing the stone like it's a letter from the builders. It's not much, but it feels like their frustration, their way of saying, "We knew her, but we couldn't tell you." You're thinking about that lotus again, the half-finished carving that's become your tomb's North Star. Lotuses meant rebirth, but also secrecy. Maybe it's a hint at why she was erased, a nod to a story too dangerous to tell. You're picturing the scholars who've studied this tomb, their notebooks filled with question marks. Did they miss something? Did they give up too soon? You're imagining one of them a wiry professor with ink-stained hands muttering, "This queen's laughing at us from the duat?" Let's throw in another quirky detail. Some obscure texts from the Greco-Roman period mention silent tombs, built to house souls that needed to stay quiet, their artifacts, chosen to confuse rather than clarify. Picture a priest maybe a bit too fond of his lotus wine stocking this tomb, with junk to throw off future diggers like a cosmic red herring. It's absurd, but it fits this tomb's vibe. Everything's a dead end, a riddle with no answer. You're chuckling again, imagining the priest smirking as he places that chipped bowl, knowing it'll drive someone like you nuts. The sound echoes, joining the tomb's secret symphony. You're moving now, your torch casting a warm glow on the walls. You notice another faint mark, barely visible, a scratch that might be a reed, might be nothing. It's maddening, like trying to solve a crossword with half the clues gone. You're thinking about the builders again, the ones who left these marks. Did they know they were creating a dead end? Did they whisper about her over cups of beer, their voices low like they were sharing a ghost story? You're picturing one of them, a grizzled mason with a tired grin, muttering, "This queen's story is buried deeper than this tomb." The chamber's starting to feel like a maze, the air pressing against you like a warning. You're hooked, and the tomb's dead ends are piling up like sand in a storm. You're ready to keep going to see what final clues this nameless queen story holds. You're still in the hidden chamber, the faint scratches and marks on the walls, fading into the shadows like whispers you can't quite catch. Your torchlight flickers, casting a warm, wavering glow that makes the rough stone seem almost alive. And the air's thick with that familiar resin and myrrh scent, now softened like the tomb's exhaling its last secrets. You're here to reflect on this nameless queen's legacy, to let her story, or what's left of it, settle into your mind as the mystery slows to a gentle close. The lotus carving, the sparse offerings, the faceless coffin, and that cryptic clay tablet are all pieces of a puzzle that's starting to feel less like a solution and more like a meditation. You're ready to let her fade into eternity, but not without one last look. Picture yourself sitting cross-legged on the dusty floor, your torch propped against the wall, its light softening the chamber's edges. In ancient Egypt, a queen's legacy was her immortality. Mainstream texts like the Stele of Karnak show queens immortalized through their names, their deeds carved into stone for the gods to read. But this queen, her legacy is absence. a deliberate void that's more powerful than any monument. You're imagining her life a woman who walked palace halls, maybe laughed at a vizier's bad joke, maybe ruled with a sharpness that scared someone. Now she's just this tomb, a whisper in the sand. You're chuckling softly, picturing her soul in the afterlife, shrugging like, well, they tried to erase me, but I'm still here. The humor's gentle, but it fades as you feel the weight of her silence. You're leaning back now, your hands resting on the cool stone, and you're thinking about the journey through this tomb. The sealed lips, the empty cartouche, the worker's whispers. Each clue was a thread, but they don't weave into a neat tapestry. You're wondering what her legacy meant to those who buried her. Did they mourn her, fear her, or just follow orders their chisels carving? Silence instead of stories. You're picturing a worker, maybe that wiry guy with the tired grin standing here in the torchlight. His hands dusty from sanding her name away. He's probably thinking, this queen's story deserved better than this. You're grinning now, imagining him sneaking that lotus, carving a tiny rebellion against the erasure. Here's a quirky tidbit to ease you into the close. Some fringe scholars, probably the ones who dream in hieroglyphs, suggest that nameless burials were meant to let a soul rest in mystery, their legacy preserved by what's not said. Picture a priest, his voice soft as he chants, explaining that her absence is her power, like a riddle the gods themselves can't solve. It's a wild idea, but it fits this tomb's vibe. Her legacy isn't in gold or glyphs, but in the questions she leaves behind. You're laughing softly, imagining her soul winking at Osiris like, good luck figuring me out. But the laughter fades as you realize how profound this is. Her erasure is her story, a shadow that lingers longer than any name. Historians still argue whether her legacy was erased to punish or protect. Some say she was a disgraced queen, her memory scrubbed to appease a god or rival. Others think her anonymity was a shield hiding her from forces too dangerous to name. You're leaning toward punishment, but only slightly. The tomb's silence feels like a grudge, but its careful craftsmanship suggests care, maybe even respect. You're picturing a high priest, his face lined with secrets, ordering her tomb, sealed with just enough to keep her soul safe but silent. You're wondering if she was a queen like Soba-Neferu, whose power was too much for some, or a forgotten wife whose story got caught in a dynasty's collapse. Let's dive into that scene one last time. You're a priest now standing in this chamber, the air heavy with myrrh and finality. Your hands are steady placing that cracked vial on the shelf, but your mind's racing. You've buried queens before grand tombs, endless offerings, but this one's different. The orders came from above, no name, no face, just silence. You're picturing her a woman with coal-lined eyes, maybe a laugh that echoed through palaces. You're not sure what she did, but you feel the weight of her erasure like a stone on your chest. You're tempted to whisper a prayer, something to give her a legacy, but you don't. You mutter, "This is why I stick to temple duties," and step back, the torchlight fading as you seal the chamber. Back to you, the explorer. You're sitting still now, your torch burning low, its light softening the chamber's edges. The lotus carving catches your eye again, that half-finished symbol of rebirth that's been your guide. It's not just a clue, it's her legacy, a stubborn hint that she was here, even if nobody wanted her remembered. You're thinking about the scribes, the workers, the priests, all those hands that built this tomb and kept her secret. Did they carry her story in their hearts, whispering it in the dark? You're picturing one of them, that grizzled mason, muttering, "Her legacy's in the silence, and that's enough." The chamber's starting to feel softer now, the air less heavy, like the tomb's letting go. You're ready to wind down, to let her story settle into the quiet. The questions remain her name, her dynasty, her crime, but they're not sharp anymore. They're like ripples on the Nile fading into the distance. You're thinking about that lotus again, its petals half carved a promise of rebirth that never quite happened. Her legacy isn't in stone or gold, it's in the mystery, the way she makes you wonder. Even now let's slow things down. Let the tomb's shadows soften around you. You're still sitting on the cool stone, the torchlight dimming its glow, wrapping you like a blanket. The air's gentle now, the resin and myrrh scent, fading into something warmer like a memory of a summer night. You're thinking about the queen, her story unfinished but not gone. She's out there in the duat, maybe smiling, maybe silent, her legacy a whisper in the sands. The chamber's quiet. The walls no longer pressing in, just holding you like a friend who knows you need rest. You're safe here, the mystery settling like dust, soft and slow. Close your eyes, let the tomb's silence cradle you, and drift into the night where her story lingers a gentle echo in your dreams.